About style of roofs, and we're going to be talking about roofs now in much more detail. Let's go to page 141, and on 141 we have flat roofs, we have shed, and we have gable, which is what most people think of when they think of a roof. We have hip roofs, which are a new style of roof that's you're seeing used more and more in more newer homes. You have two different types of hips. You have one with a large ridge beam, and then you have some that don't have a ridge beam at all. They literally come to a point. Then you have the barn roofs, which are gambrel, masters, which you'll see in some of the older Victorians, and then you have the pinnacles and the Gothics, but you usually don't see those too much in residential roofs. Okay, let's go to page 42, and let's go over some of the parts and terms of a roof. Also, I want to take the time to let you know that when you're talking about roofs, when you're talking about roof finishes, you'll find them in roof finishes in Simsol. When you're looking for them, that's where they'll be. Okay. Excuse me. Now, we have the flashing, which we were talking about for the chimney. We have the rake of the roof. That's where that's coming down along the side on the gable. We have the deck, which is the actual slope of the roof, the actual material that could be on there. Remember that the decking could be everything from solid lumber that's on a horizontal or a diagonal. It could be plywood. It could be the particle board. Usually, it's going to be a much heavier or thicker than what you would find for sheathing on the side of the house. You need to know what the thickness is of that, by the way, for the decking. You see, we have valleys now. We have the dormers, which we've talked about, and we have the ridges. Now, with ridges, we also have different things like vents and things that we'll be talking about also. Okay, so that's part of a roof. And we have the eave edge, which is the bottom part of the slope. Okay, let's go to 143. Now, when you're starting to get the measurements of a roof, the several things that you have to understand is you need to know, in order for you to get the common rafter, which is what we're trying to understand here, the math for a common rafter, we need to know what kind of measurements that we need to go for. And the two measurements we need to go for are a rise and run. And sometimes to find run, we need to know span. So let me explain to you how this works. You can see them on there. Let's do a side of a gable. Okay. We have the rise, and we have the span. So we have the rise, and we have the span. And half of the span from here over, or from here over, is the run. So the rise and the run. Okay? If you know anything about math, that you'll be using the rise and the run to find the hypotenuse. Okay? So now let's talk about this. The house, if it has eaves that come out over the house, comes here and here. So this would not be the span. The span is from the edge of the roof to the other edge of the roof, okay? And the run would be from that edge to the center. It's very important to understand. You don't want to measure from here, you want to measure from out here. And we'll talk about how you get those measurements using for the rise a little later when we start going into more of the math. Okay. Now, let's go to our next page, which would be 44. Now what we're talking about here is pitch. pitch is how many inches up to how many feet out for every foot out. So it would be if it's 1 and 12, it would be 1 inch for every 12 for every foot. It's 2, and the higher the pitch, the different types of roofing materials you have. Slate, wooden shingles, asphalt from here to about, I would say, to a 4. And that would be as far as I want to go. And then below that would be rolled roofing. And below that is definitely rolled roofing or flat roofing from that point on. It could be membrane. Okay? So it gives you an indication of what's the right pitch for the right roof. Let's go to cornices, box cornices. Now, you have underneath the extension of your gable, you have you have a soffit, and the soffit is going to be underneath. The soffit could be wood, it could be vinyl, it could be aluminum, it could be tin. I've seen tin. And it could be wood. It could be multiple different types of woods. It could be cedar. It could be plywood. It could be almost anything, any kind of material. You need to see what kind of material it is, and then you need to know the actual width of it, and it's going to be measured by the linear foot most of the time. Some soffits and some software programs actually you want square footage. You need to look at Simsol. Simsol is not as accurate in the soffits as far as, because they're giving you basic width, and sometimes your basic width isn't going to follow. So if that's the case, I would go to the closest width and preferably go to the little larger one, and then just change the actual numbers in the software. The numbers aren't going to make that much difference because they're going to be that close as far as the width are concerned. The materials, you're not talking about a lot. Remember, we aim for the eagles, so we bag the pheasant so we don't eat crow. They're going to, if they have any problem with it, they'll try to bring it down, and you may use that as a negotiating point for something else. Fascia. We have 2 different fascias. Remember, I told you before, we have the wooden fascia, and then we have the fascia that would be the fascia that is, if we have vinyl siding, they would then put a vinyl front. If we have aluminum siding, they would have aluminum front, and accordingly. Okay? And then we have a shingle molding, which sometimes you see on wooden shingles. I have never yet seen it on anything else. You'll also have a drip edge. And in fact, let's go to our next one. Oh, you have a freeze board also. You can see the freeze board. But let's go to the next page. And here we're talking about, you can actually see a flush cornice and the difference. And the molding now is considered freeze board. You can see the fascia, shingle molding. And let's go to our next page. 47. The one before that was 46. Okay, now we have, we're going to be talking about ice damming. Now, when you have a gutter and you have a low sloping roof most of the time, what you'll have is the snow and ice will build up in the gutter, and then it will freeze and thaw and make like an ice damming effect in there. And then what ends up happening is it starts to build up as we have more snow and ice, or even from a large storm, and then it starts to freeze and thaw and freeze and thaw, and it starts to lift up the shingle and just pushes up the shingle, and it builds up underneath the shingle and keeps pushing in. And then when you have your final thaw, the water then melts back into the house and then goes right into the home, and it creates dramatic amounts of damage. Now remember, this would only be covered under all risk because there's no opening. Because what happens is as soon as that thaws, it automatically comes right back down again. And if you notice, we have underneath the shingles, they have what's like a membrane. It's an ice damming membrane, and it looks like tar. It's about that thick, and it's about 3 foot wide, and it comes in a big roll, and they put that out, and it helps seal the ends of the roofs. If you've had a client that's had ice damming, I would definitely, if you for whatever reason have a chance to let them know that when the roof gets replaced in the future, to make sure that they put that in, have that added to their thing. What the reason is that happens is that there's not enough cold air underneath the roof. The roof gets getting insulated, and not enough insulation, and ends up having the heat coming from out of the house, so that it then heats up underneath the roof, melting and then refreezing every night, melting and refreezing, which then brings up that process. So if they need to open that up, need to maybe put more holes in the soffit, they need to add more ventilation. Sometimes they use different foam things or cardboard pieces to keep the insulation inside the roof attic from allowing to cut off the airflow. So that might be part of the problem. You need to see and look up in the attic and see if that's part of the problem. Need to have a good airflow throughout the roof. That'll help stop a lot of ice damming. Okay, then let's go to page 48. And in 48, we are showing you solving the problem. See, we've added more ventilation, and we put an ice shield, ice and snow shield, which I was just telling you about, and thicker amount of insulation over top of the rooms to keep the heat from actually penetrating the attic area. You can only do so much of that, especially if they have an attic stairwell that comes up. But sometimes you'll even see them where they actually put a big tuft of or a big foam thing or something over top of that, so that when they open it up, it actually is laying over top. But it's hard when you've got a ladder. So more ventilation makes a difference. Now let's go to page 49. In 49, we're talking about ventilation, so we have different types of vents. If you see on the top, we have a gable vent. That's the kind of vent that we had on my house when I was growing up. Cupola vent, which you don't normally see, and a lot of cupola vents, believe it or not, are just decorative. They're not real vents. So just because it has it up there doesn't mean it's real. A lot of times it's decorative. Also a ridge vent. Problem with ridge vents is that ridge vents are not all equal. Rain will come down. Rain will go sideways. If you've ever seen Tornado, Twister, the movie Twister, and they sit there and they go, "We got rain band," which means they got sideways rain that's actually going sideways. And what ends up happening is it gets literally forced right up in the roof, goes up the roof, and it goes up into the vent and drops right down inside the vent, right through that little hole, then puts water right in their insulation. And then that goes through, if a heavy enough storm, like a northeaster or a hurricane type storm, it'll then put in a lot of moisture and then go into the ceilings. You usually see you see water damage right in the middle of the house. Okay, you have foundation vents, and you have turbine vents. Sometimes you see them nowadays. Usually they're commercial vents, but I have seen them for homes, and you will find them for homes. Remember, all those vents are concerning about flashing as well. It's sealing them off. Now, roof shingles. Let's start with asphalt shingles. Now we're going to start talking about materials. What do you actually put as far as the actual surfacing materials on a roof? First thing you need to do is you need to put down a layer on top of the decking that's going to help keep the moisture out. And they use tar paper. There's two different weights. One's 30 pounds for a roll, if you see on the far left-hand side, and one is 15 pounds. The majority of time, what you're going to find on a roof is a 15-pound weight. Unless it's a very expensive roof and they've ordered it, mainly 15 pounds is what you're going to find. And so that goes down first. Then you have your shingles. Now, just talking about this with another adjuster, the next 5 to 10 years, you're pretty much going to see 3-tab shingles basically disappear. You're not going to be seeing, you're actually seeing them now disappear dramatically in a lot of roofs. When they're replacing the roofs, they're replacing them with dimensional looking the multiple laminates and dimensional type shingles right now. And the reason why they're doing that is because it's a double thickness, and the tabs is where you have the problem. The tabs are what end up being ripped up by the wind. And if you're having dimensional, it's the whole full 36 inches. That's like one full tab, and it's a lot heavier. So the odds of the tab being ripped up, unless it's a very strong wind, is a lot less possible than with just a single 3-tab shingle that you'll find. And then you have the dimensional size. And now, understand, these are basically designed for to try to make them look like either wood or slate. This is basically, they're trying to mimic something else. Some of the older homes, and yet you'll see it sometimes for siding as well, it's called interlocking T-lock shingles. They're pretty much, I don't think you can still order them anymore. I haven't seen them, and they usually have to be totally replaced with another shingle. So you're pretty much going to be able to get the same square footage, but I'm assuming upon the weight of them that it's going to be probably in the middle range, and I would probably I would aim for the 340 pound. They come in different weights. The 3 tabs are basically always going to be 240 pounds, and that's a 25-year roof. Okay, and that's what it's going to look at, and that's what you're going to be your three tab shingle. Then your dimensionals are going to be around the 340, and that's going to be a 30-year roof. They do have a 355, but I would basically stick with the two, which would be the 240, which is the 3 tabs, and the dimensional, which is what you would see on the top far right. You'll see those. And you periodically, believe it or not, you will come across the bottom one, which is it's one full shingle, but it's not a dimensional thing. It's just that is out there, but they don't make it anymore. So if you see that, replace the whole roof. You should replace the whole roof anyway. That's what you should be going for. Now, let's talk about measuring of a roof as far as what we use in measurement. In here, we use what is known as a square. Okay, that's what it's called. It's called a square. And in a square, and you have to understand, the dimensions will change. But basically, so you understand, it's 10 feet by 10 feet, or 100 square feet. Okay, so is it 10 by 10 is a square? 10 by 10 is a square, but a square can be 1 by 100. That's a square. Okay, so the size and shape of it doesn't mean anything. It's how many square feet. So if I have measured out, and we're going to be talking about measurements in a minute, if I have measured out, let's say I have 550 square feet in a slope. Okay, now how do I find out how many squares I have? I divide that by 100. So this would be 5.5 squares. Pretty easy, isn't it? Math is not hard. You just need to know how it relates to what you're doing. So 1 square is 100 square feet, divided into how many square feet you have. Okay, let's go to page 51. And at 51, you're going to see, if you see on the far left, one thing I want to show you here is that they have a thing called a drip edge. Okay, that's on the side. So that needs to be replaced. As they start putting in shingles, they use what is known as a starter course. And I've just talked to an adjuster who was talking about arguing where they were saying that, in fact, we were talking about that large shingle we were talking about, where they actually were saying that there was a small little damage on one, and since we couldn't find the shingles anymore, that you could take out that starter course. Well, number one, the starter course, it could be anything practically off the truck. They don't care about it. What they'll do is they'll take like the 3-tab shingles, which look like this, and they'll flip them around so that they now look like this. And that now becomes the base right along the edge here on the shingle. And they put one down, another one down. They put them down like this. And then what they do is then they put the next one on, which would then go on like this. And then they would then put another one over here, and then another one over top of this one, another one over top of this one, another one over top of that one, another one on top of that one, so that the seams are no longer over top of each other. But now, and they leave enough over the edge, just about 2 to 3 inches, sometimes 4, depending upon who's doing it, but usually about 2 to 3 inches over the side, so that it actually comes over and actually into the gutters, so that it'll keep it away from the fascia. And then they just start putting up rows and rows and rows all the way up. And if you notice, on the bottom left-hand corner, where they're trimming 5 inches off of one, 4 inches off another, 8 inches off another, sometimes what they'll do is they'll just stagger them in the middle. And they'll just go all the way out. Sometimes they actually take the time to measure them, and then they know the best way they want to do it. But in general, they're staggered. And then you have, underneath that, you have your tar paper. Now, let's go to page 152. And 152, this is something that we will never agree to. Excuse me. And what that is that you have an old roof, and they want you to put another roof over top of that. Now, you can do that by code. You can have 2 roofs. The problem, though, is, number one, the second roof doesn't last as long because the heat and wear of the second roof underneath it shortens the life of the roof that you're putting on. Also, you're taking away the right of the homeowner for them to be able to save the money. Why should the insurance company save the money of having to not rip off that roof, in comparison to letting the homeowner take advantage of that in the future? Easy argument. They'll never push it, and never let them tell you that you have to put a second roof over the first roof. Bar none. Easy to do. Takes care of it just like that. Now, let's go to page 153. Now, 153, you're looking at what is known as a ridge caps and hip caps. That's important to know that what they're doing is most of the time they're taking that out of, supposed to be like 3-tab shingles. They would just cut them into thirds and use them as the that. You can also buy a hitch cap, and that would be a linear foot. I wouldn't do, you don't measure that by the square. You can, sometimes that'll be actually part of the unit price. But you can also, may not be that way because you're only doing a certain slope. So look in SimSol and figure the best way that you want to handle it. Try to maximize it as much as you possibly can, because you can do just cap as well. And if the other adjuster's not on their toes, you can get something a little extra for the client. And remember, these adjusters, they can be brand new, not know anything. And not willing to argue with you. Let's talk about valleys. You have open valleys and closed valleys. Whatever you do not step in the valley. If you are on the roof, you do not step in the valley. You break the valley, you damage the valley. And on an open valley, with the flashing, you could actually get hurt. You could actually slide down and actually hurt yourself. And grabbing the gutter 9 times out of 10 will not save you, because the gutter is only thin metal at best for most homes. Now they have flashing that they put in the gutters. So if I'm replacing a roof, I'm also going to replace the what? The flashing, and the flashing is measured by how? Linear feet. Flashing is measured by linear feet, because when they rip up that roof, they're going to be ripping up that flashing. So I'm going to replace the flashing, the drip edge, and I'm going to have that all part of that. That's all what? Linear feet. Linear feet. Okay. Let's go to 55. Now, that's actually, they're showing you real close on how they cut it. Let's go to 56. Okay, we have waist. We have a waist factor. So once we've done our measurements, we want to add a what is known as a waist factor. For if I have just one with if I have no extra, like no valleys, no chimney, no dormers, then I'm going to go, if I'm a gable, at 10%. If I have at least one valley or two valleys, then I'm going to go at 12% extra. So if I have the 5.5 square, I would put another 10% on if there was no extra valleys or dormers or chimneys. If I did, then I would go to 12% of that additional on that, and then put that in. See, now that, remember, sieve saw will not do that. Saw will not do that. So you need to put it in for it. Okay, now let's go to 57. Okay, now we're going to hit some simple and basic formulas. These are your standard geometry formulas. You have basically three shapes. You have a rectangle, a square, a triangle, and a trapezoid. Rectangle and a square basically always measure the same thing, length times width. Here they have A times B. I would say, A times B, length times width, okay? Now, we already know how to do that. That's very simple. And then you divide that by what? 100. That's not a problem. Triangles. Where would I find a triangle? How about if I'm doing a hip roof on the edge of the two ends of the hip roofs? Or if I've got a hip roof without a ridge beam, then I have 4 triangles, right? Okay, triangle's really simple. You take A times B, or length times width, times divided by 1/2, divided by 2. Okay. Now, if I have 2 slopes that are triangles, I'm not going to divide by 2. I'm going to take length times width, and that's going to give me both of the measurements. Okay. If I have 2 of these, one on this side and one on the other side of the house, I am going to take length times the common rafter, and now I've got this side and this side automatically. Now, you don't know how many slopes you're going to get. You try to put in for all the slopes, but you may end up being negotiating down to 2 slopes or 3 slopes, or accordingly. So depending on the shape of the roof and so forth, and that's usually done by line of sight. If you can see it from one to another somewhere on that property, then you should be able to get it. The first thing you should do is you should always put in for a whole roof, and then negotiate down. You can't negotiate up, okay? So you start with the whole roof and then work your way back. And then when you're working your way back, you're working your way back as far as the line of sight. What you can see, what you can't see, okay? From where to where. If I can see 2 sides from any point, I've got that one. If I can see 2 sides from any point, I've got that one, and so forth. Now, nationwide is going to be a fight for that one. If I've only got one triangle, it's length times width divided by 2, or 1/2 of that. Now, the next one is known as a trapezoid, where you have a short top, it's like a square rectangle, but then it has a big bottom. And it can be like this, it can be like this, where it's straight up and down and it's slanted over here. The formula is the same. And if you notice, it says A times B, okay? A times B times C. So it's A times B times C, which is what? Common rafter. It's the common rafter, which we've talked about. And I'll show you how to get that later on. A times B times C. What? Divided by 2. So it's A times B times C, common rafter, divided by 2. Okay, and that'll give you the answer for the square footage. Then you what? Divide that by what? 100. And as algebra would say, this is x. So this gives you x, and you take x and divide it by 100. Now, makes a difference what shape it would be. It automatically will fit the same characteristic. If it's a parallelogram, that's basically nothing more than a rectangle that's slanted on the side. Same thing that you're going to get. B then becomes common rafter. B's common rafter and everyone except for a trapezoid. Now, let's go to 58. If you have a hip roof and you're going for the whole hip roof, these are the measurements. By the way, remember, looking at your paperwork and here in your documentation, it shows you trapezoids, squares, rectangles. It tells you, and you can grab the information right here for whoever's going to be putting the system into SimSolve. Okay, plus it also which kind of roof it is and what kind of materials it is, all tells you right there. It's easy to put in, so they can then like that bang it out. Plus the photographs helps dramatically. Now, a shortcut for that is the common rafter times length times 2. Common rafter times length times 2. That's it. Now, best for you to do each different trapezoid and do triangles that way. Doing a shortcut is not always doing the math that you should be doing. Is not always the best way to do it. Now, we needed to find what the hypotenuse was to find the common rafter. And you're hearing this term hypotenuse, and you're saying to yourself, man, that sounds like my kids' math. Well, yeah, it is. And you haven't used it for a long time. I love that show. Are you smarter than a 5th grader? Yeah, that's it. Laugh, Tony. Okay, now, it's real C. C, we have A, by the way, we're on page 59. A, B, and C, common rafter. A is what? The rise. And B is what? The run. Okay, so now we need to find that. So the formula is C equals square root of what? A squared plus B squared. Okay. You may not know what squaring a number means. You may have heard it over and over again. You say, man, I haven't had to use that for I don't know how long. What does squaring a number mean? Here, this is what it means. If the number is 10, to square it, you times it by itself. So 10 times 10 equals 100. That's squaring the number. If it was 5. 5 times 5 is 25, okay? Then you add them both together. That would be 125. And then you get your little calculator, who always has a little square root number on it, and then you hit square root. So you times A, B times B, and then you add them together, and then you hit the little square root key, and then you now have common rafter. You have C right there, okay? And C, remember, when you're doing a roof, let's go over this again. Squaring A is timesing it times itself. Squaring B is squaring B times itself. So you're squaring the rise, squaring the run times themselves, adding them together, square, and then squaring that using the square root key. That gives you C. Now you have one of the measurements to do the roof, to do a slope. To get the other one, you look at the eave edge, and you can measure the eave edge. That should be able to be done from down below. How do I get the rise, though? The run's pretty simple, right? Because it's half of the span. If I'm looking at a roof, and I got my glasses on, because I need my glasses, I can almost say, like, here's the edge of my siding, comes right here, and the roof comes over to here. So I could kind of get an idea. I can even do that from down below, get a rough idea of it's 19 inches, 18 inches. It's not going to be that hard to get pretty darn close to what it is. So you add this times 2 to the whole siding. You did the whole siding, right? And then you add the overhangs, okay? Divide that by 2, okay? Gives you what? The run. How do I get the rise, though? How do I get the rise? Because I don't want to get up on a ladder and sit there and, how am I going to do that? This is a 3-story tall building. How am I going to do that? A couple different ways. First one is, let's say I can get up top and get into the attic and has one of those nice pull down ladders. I get up there, I get up, and usually those ladders are right in the center of the attic. And what you do is you get up there, and right on the bottom, not the top, but the bottom of the rafter, or actually should be right on top of the deck would be fine. So on top of the deck, and go all the way up to where the ridge beam is, and then go all the way up to the top of that ridge beam and get that measurement. I'd add a couple inches just for the thicknesses of different things. Now I've got the rise, okay? So now I have the rise, I got the run, I know what the common rafter is. Well, what do I do if the crawl space is this big? It's a little opening about this big. It's in a closet. And look at me. Do you think I'm going through that closet hole? I don't think so. And you may not even want to, even if you're real thin and slim. So, how do I do it now? Oh, geez. How do I find that rise? Well, a couple different ways. Maybe I have siding. And if I have siding, I might be able to measure the distance between here and here on that siding, and then count how many sidings from where the eave edge comes down, right here, from here. So I might be able to count from here, and then count how many of the sidings are up there. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, so forth. And then multiply this, which I can get a measurement of this, possibly down here. Okay? Then I can just take this measurement here, multiply it times these, and get the rise. But sometimes you got houses where you got brick down here, and then you got the other kind of siding up here. Well, how in the world do you get up there? Well, if it's low enough, you might be able to get a ladder just to get the measurement up here. If not, then we have to go another route. Maybe it's brick. It could be brick all the way up. If it's brick, if it's a whole brick siding like that, then you can count the brick and do that. Same thing, same scenario. But if it's this way and I can't, or how about it here? It's stucco. They built this house out of stucco. How am I going to find out what the measurement is? I can't measure stucco, right? Can't sit there and go, there's so many stuccos up. Stucco is one big thing. So, one more way to figure this out. Let's go to the slope. Now remember, I'm trying to show you every possible way for you not to go onto that roof. Every possible way for you not to go on that roof. When you're there with the adjuster, if the adjuster doesn't have a ladder, if you don't have a ladder, there's no way to get up there, then they'll be looking at it from down below. You may want to have a ladder. You may want to have one of your contractors meet you there, since you're having contractors actually set this up, contractors. It's a great way to make great relationships with the attorneys and help them out, make that extra rubbing in the elbows and everything else, is to then take them up. Well, contractor, you're already up there anyway. You've grabbed the information already. But let's say you're an attorney and you got it through another realm. Contractors, you guys know how to get up there. Attorneys, this is not something you do. So, I'm trying to help you so that you don't have to go on that roof. Now, let's say we can see the actual roof. We can see where all the different breaks are in the roof, all the different shingle and the different rows, all the way up on that slope. We are going to guesstimate that's between 5 to 5.5 inches between here to here. Do it with 5.0, then do it with 5.5. And then you pick which one you think is a better one to go. Aim for the eagle, let them negotiate way down. Okay? Aim here, let them go down here. Now you can just say 5 times 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and you just add them up. You got your number. Now you have the full common rafter without even worrying about the formula. Okay? I just heard a bunch of sighs and reliefs out there in the ether. Going, man, dodge that bullet. So, told you, this course is designed for you. Believe it or not, a lot of insurance adjusters do not want to go in rooms. And they're insurance adjusters. Figure that one out. Okay, let's go to page 60. On 60, we're now going to go to a different kind of roofing. It's called rolled roofing. It's for very low sloping roofs. A lot of times where you'll see it is on like a shed dormer on the back of a house. That's mainly where you see it. Very seldom will you see it on the main part of the house. It's a heavier grade of the shingle, and I believe by the way, the length of a shingle, the age of a shingle, and how long it'll last. We were talking about before with the 40 pounders or the three tabs, for about 25 years. If you're down south, subtract 5 years, 20 years. If you're dealing with a 340 or the composition type shingles where they're different shapes and have the 2 levels, 30 years. If you're down south, subtract 5 years. That extra heat really does a number on them. And then you'll have an idea. Now, if you talk about rolled roofing, take it 20 years and then subtract, or 15 years, closer to 15, and then subtract 5 if you're down south. And they basically overlap, and that's how they do that. Most of the time, the way you'll see it is done the first way, not the second way. So just to let you know that. And then you have, for hips, you also have pieces that they'll put down and they tack over top. Let's go to, and rolled roofing would be in the roofing section. Very simple and easy, and you solve by, again, by square. It's by the square. And square is what? Square is the square footage divided by 100. Okay, wood roofs. Now, with wood roofs, I want you, wood roofs and membrane roofs. We're going to be going over them, but I want you to go through the estimating scope and go through page 76 to 84. Okay? 76 to 84 will give you much more detail on the repair and understanding of wooden and membrane roofs. Okay? Now we're going to go over them, but I wanted to let you know that. Again, I could go for a whole hour on just wood roofs and membrane roofs, just to talk about them. Now, a wood roof, you have two different types of shingles. In a lot of places, you can't even get wood roofs anymore because they're a major fire hazard. Because when the fire happens, wood roofs have a tendency to fly and land on other roofs and start fires in different people's homes. So you're in some places you're only allowed to repair only a certain amount of the roof before you have to totally get rid of it. Okay, and that might be, you have to look at your codes in your particular area on that. Wood roofs come in two different flavors. We have where they actually, it's a saw cut, and that's called a cedar shingle, and or it could be a cypress shingle, could be any kind of water resistant type of wood. Now, the other one is known as a cedar shake, and how they take cedar shakes is they take a piece of wood and they take a wedge and they put it in and they hit it and they split it. Just like you used to think of Abraham Lincoln splitting rails, well, they do the exact same thing with cedar shake. So they're very not even, they're very rough. You probably find them more, if any place, maybe down south. I doubt you'll find them in the east if you see a wood shingle. I'm in the northeast. If you do, it's a barn, something like that, nothing really major. And with the new composite materials, you can, the cost is very close to the wood roof to the composite materials, so that if you do your job right, they can actually replace the roof with the new composite materials. They are unbelievable. Communicate this to your homeowner. Don't just let them know that now because they can't put the new wooden roof on, that they can't have that same great look that they had before. Oh, come on, a wooden roof is just so cool looking. Even though it turns gray, they can actually get the wooden roof, so it actually is a composite material, so that it never looks gray. It always looks like it's brand new. And that's pretty cool. And it lasts for practically forever. This new composite material, if you've ever heard the term free radicals, and usually you'll hear that when you're hearing about medicines and vitamins and all that kind of stuff. Well, free radicals are what comes from the sun and different things, and that actually is what depreciates and sun damage and everything else to your drapes and everything else. So the free radicals don't really affect these new composite materials, so they almost seem like they last forever. They're heavier and they're much stronger on the roof to actually keep them down there. So let them know about that. And the composite materials look like exactly like slate. They look exactly like the new tiles that they use for ceramic tiles. They look exactly like wood tiles. They're my next house. I'm building the whole house, siding and everything out of new composite materials. Okay, now, so that's enough for that. Again, they're measured by the square. And you should always make sure that if you're going to replace them, or if you can replace them, that you're going to be looking at putting paper underneath it. Okay. Tar paper. Now let's go, or felt paper. Now, you should see in the next 62, you can actually see where they're actually putting the tar paper between each different layer. And if you notice, it's an open boards on the roof. And it's no spacing down below and spacing up top. That's so that the roof can breathe. Remember, the odds are that you're not going to be able to replace that whole roof, but if you can replace that whole roof, go for it. The odds is that the problem is that cedar shakes are not going to age the same level. So one's going to be gray, one's going to be brand new. They're not going to look the same. Argue that point. Go for the whole roof. That's the angle that I would go for. Let's go for the, and they're also measured by the square. And you can read more about them in there. Remember that you can also, just as we're talking about cedar shake and cedar shingles, for cedar shingles is what you'll see also for siding. So see if you go to the beach, to the shore area, you usually find a lot of times there. That's a little different than the roof. They are not problems with trying to replace them. Again, they also come in the composite materials again. Let's go to page 63, which is all about metal roofs. Metal roofs, when you have a slope in a commercial building, it's almost always going to be a metal roof. Almost always going to be a metal roof. There's a new trend because the metal is changing. You have multiple different types of metals. You have, in the old days, metal roof would be something, you'd call that, you'd be down south, you'd say, oh, look at the tin roof, on the barn, or the tin roof on the house. Maryland's got tons of tin roofs. Virginia's got tons of tin roofs. The materials are changing. They're now with also a very baked on paint and almost like an epoxy paint on them, and they come in green and blue and red, and they're really colorful. And if you put down the right, also right insulation underneath them, they're also pretty quiet. That was the problem with the tin roof. Loud, noisy, water hitting that noise, and then multiply that. And that was the problem with them. Well, they come in different materials. They still come in the galvanized, and they also come in aluminum, copper. They also, like I said, are now coated with new epoxy paints. And copper is the most expensive out of the ones. If a metal roof has a problem, by the time they take off that joint, the seam, and try to put it back on, it usually damages, so you can usually get the full roof every time if you have that kind of a damage. Most times of these roofs is because you've had some rusting here, and because it's been old galvanized. By the way, galvanized rusts because after a while the galvanized wears off as a zinc oxide outside, and then when that wears off, then it starts rusting, and then air can get underneath it and becomes almost like a balloon type scenario, just rips it open. And then you just see ripped sections coming off. There's other reasons why it might also come off as well, because of just wear of moving of wind and everything else that has worn it. Now, let's go to page 164. That's also done by the square as well. By the square. And what's a square? Square foot divided by 100. Okay, slate shingles. Slate shingles are unique because if you saw the slate roof, unless it was put on in the early 1800s or the early 1900s, it's one of the last kind of slate roofs being put on. I'm sorry, let me restate that. Unless it's been put on like in the 20s or the 30s, which they still were putting down slate roofs. All your new slate roofs now, when they have damage, have to be replaced. Now here's the kicker with a slate roof. If they've done repairs before, then all they have to do again is repairs. But the problem with doing repairs on a slate roof is that you touch it here, you crack that one there. You do something here, another one happens there. It's like chopping up old concrete. You can't chop up old concrete and not expect to make a crack someplace else. You can't walk on these things and you almost need a bucket truck to fix them, especially if the things are up higher. That's a major expense all on its own. That's if you can get a bucket truck to go in these particular areas. So you have dramatic cost involved in slate roofs. And the best thing is to try to replace it. And the cost of the composite materials and the removal of everything else, the removal on this is going to be dramatic. Okay, you understand? It's dramatic with this. You have to protect everything down below, because when these slates come off, they do dramatic damage. You're throwing off rock off the side of the house. So you realize, throwing off a rock with an edge, protecting bushes and everything else, it's going to be dramatic. Cost is extremely high. So when you see a slate roof, say, thank you, Lord, for sending me a slate roof that needs fixing, because it needs to be replaced. Now, Let's go to 65. And we're going to start talking about clay roofing, okay? Sometimes it's known as terracotta roofing, okay? They come in different different types. There's, if you see on there, 65, you see Roman, you see Spanish, you see French, you see all different Greek. You see all different, the barrel. You see all these different styles. What you're again looking at. Don't worry. You need to know the style, and you need to know the square. How many squares it is. Remember, squares is length times width divided by what? 100. So you need to know what the slope is, how much you're replacing. And here's something, you're probably going to have a certain amount of fading going on, so you're not going to be able to match these things. These are another one where they actually have a problem. You have a lot of extra different things that have to be done on this roof, and it's all the unit pricing will actually be put into it. And let me show you what I'm talking about. Let's go to page 66. By the way, these are different additional type pieces that would be going on there for different reasons, for the top, for different areas, for capping and so forth. That's all built into the unit price. But let's go down to 67. Just to let you know what they are, but they're all going to be built into your unit price. 67 shows you right there. You see the exterior rafter. Exterior rafter. This is the only time that a roofer actually puts in a rafter, not a carpenter. It's called an exterior rafter. Now, if one of those gets damaged, the roofer repairs it, not a carpenter. Now, doesn't mean that I wouldn't try to get a carpenter in there, but it's a roofer. Now, let's go to our 68. Now we have what is known as built-up roofing. And built-up roofing, we have multiple layers. And we have to be considering, this is called a hot tar roof. And what they do is they put down an insulation material. It almost looks like not foam. They will put foam board down, but it's another material. Almost looks like really fine chopped up burlap, and then it's all glued together into a board. They put that down, and then they screw that down, and then they put their first layer of tar paper, and if they put hot pitch on that, it's hot tar on top of that, then they put a layer of tar paper down, and then they put they use a big broom, they put more tar down, then they put another layer down on top of that, if you can see that, another layer and another layer and another layer and another layer, all the way across. And that's only one layer across the whole roof. That's not 15, if it's that many took, that's one, okay? Then they do that back, they come back all the way back over again. That's 2. Then they go back all the way back over again, put another layer, another layer, another layer, another layer. 3. Residential will have 3 layers. Commercial will have 5. Okay? And then on top of that, sometimes they will then mop out the hot tar and then put slag on top of that. Okay? Now slag will move because think about it, it's ice moving, water moving, snow moving, that moves that. And wind will also move slag, believe it or not. So that can actually be brushed back out. Finding a leak in a flat roof is very difficult. So, and a lot of insurance companies do not like flat roofs. Okay, now we're going to talk about one other thing. Let's go to our next page. On a flat roof, if you see that canting strip, the canting strip, they put that on the corners to keep you from being able to, because if you put your foot there, you'd go right through, you'd put a hole in it. So they put that there. They also put a parapet, which is basically like a wall, so that it helps to drain off to the one side. Sometimes they'll put full solid boards down. You'll see a lot of old tongue and groove. Mainly this kind of roof is a very cheap roof to put on because you don't have to put the rafters on. That's why they do this. But again, it's by the square. If you're going to repair it, you're going to repair it by at least 3 times the amount of the area that needs to be done. 3 times, because they have to feather this in. 3 times. Whatever the area is, that's what you're going to be repairing it with. You try to put in for the whole roof, And if not, you then go down to that particular point where it's 3 times the size of wherever the damage is, letting them know that if it leaks again, that you're going to come after them again. Okay? And a lot of times you have to. If you notice on page 70, what you're going to see is what's known as a gravel stop. Looks kind of like a drip edge, what we had, but now it's on a flat roof, and it's a lot more heftier than actually a drip edge is. It's much more, again, linear foot is how you're going to be measuring it, how you're going to be putting it in there. Now, the linear foot of this will be across the whole edge, and probably have it on 1 to 2 sides. Very seldom would you have it on all 4 sides, because usually flat roofs are in row homes, and row homes are, trapped between something. You may actually have one edge, but usually what they'll do is they'll put an extra parapet wall on the one side. Now, that's page 70. Now let's go to 71. Let's talk about gutters. Whew, man, I'll tell you what, gutters come in all different shapes and sizes and materials. Mainly 2 different types of materials, 2 basic types of materials. First material is wood. You said wood? Yeah. Believe it or not, when I was growing up, I had wood gutters in my house, and it was built in the 50s. Had beautiful cedar gutters, and they're all carved out, and they were a U-shaped, or the half round shaped. And they went from one end of the house to the other end of the house. Did they never leak? Nope, they never leaked. And they lasted the whole time. And my father finally, before he sold the house, took them down, because he knew that people wanted to see metal gutters. And he had them put in the new seamless gutters. Now that's a whole other thing we need to talk about. Metal gutters and seamless and seamed gutters. A seamed gutter is just exactly what it sounds like. It's a section of metal, and then they re-seam it, and then they have another section of metal, and they'll seam it again. Usually 2-3 seams maximum on a gutter, and then they'll put end caps. Okay, now then they have brackets, and you're going to be doing that by linear feet. So it's linear feet again, but it's also determined by, and if you notice, you have 3 different types here. You have half round, D style, and K style. Now, different metals though. You have copper, the high end, aluminum, the low end, or middle end, and galvanized steel, the bottom. Okay, and so you're going to have those 3 different basically type of materials. I believe they're now also looking at different types of poly type of gutters as well. I haven't seen them yet. I've just heard about them. Then you have downspouts. Downspouts again are going to be metal. They could actually be a different metal than what you're actually looking at in your gutters. The reason is because downspouts could have been replaced. The gutters may be original, but the downspouts may have been lost, damaged, or whatever, and they could be a whole different set. Again, linear foot, and also you also have with that a problem. Let's say we're talking about a duplex. Duplex is where you have 2 houses connected in the middle, and what they've done is they put a seamless gutter all the way across. Well, they did that on purpose, but if this guy's the only one that's damaged, unless this guy also wants to replace his also, they're only going to pay for half. So this guy's going to have to pay for the other half if they want to go back to seamless again. Okay, so that's also a challenge that sometimes you come across. So linear footage, what kind of gutter, K, D, half round, and the material. Okay, and that's pretty much it for gutters. Pretty simple, pretty straightforward. Now, then they have the gutter helmets and the things that are going on top to try to keep that out. That'll be depending upon what manufacturer, and you'll have to find that out through them, the costs on that, because I don't believe that's going to be in Simsol. Sometimes they might put a grating over top of that. Sometimes you see these little mesh wire things going into where the gutter spouts are. So that's pretty much it. For downspouts, for wooden, they actually cut the hole. They then hit it with tar and different things in there, and they set it in there, and then it gives you the same scenario. Again, ours lasted for a very long time. I don't think my father cleaned them out but once for the whole time. So wooden gutters aren't as bad as you think they are. Now, let's go to page 72. We're talking about trim work on the outside of the house. We're starting to work our way down off this roof. And we have to, if you look at it, we have a windowsill. We have a water table. Now that's if you're going to be having different siding, which we'll talk about later on. And then we have our drip caps, and remember we have a freeze board, we have fascias. That's all part of that right there. Now let's go to page 72, 73. All measured by what? Linear footage. Linear footage. First siding is called beveled siding, okay? Sometimes known as clapboard if you are up in the Northeast. Clapboard, though, original clapboard is a little different than what you would see or what it's made out to look like in aluminum or vinyl. Because on the bottom, in the first bottom rows, it's very small and slowly works its way up to bigger. I think it's like the first 3 are small, and then it starts working up to the normal size, the normal width of how it should be. So you can't just count the things. You have to realize that down here it's a lower size. Siding. Measuring the size of a house, the gable parts, could be very simple, could be the same scenarios if we need to find the rise and the run. Now, let's say this is going to be this is worth paying for the course what I'm about to tell you. Not too many people know how to do this. Remember, it was a squared plus b squared, right? And then you squared that. Then you square rooted that to find out what you're going to get for C. Remember? C, A, B. Well, let's say I know what C is. Okay, so now I want to get, if I know what C is, and how did I find that? Maybe I found it from counting so I know what C is. And I know what B is. So what I do is I take B, minus it from C, and I get A. That's how the math works. B minus from C gives me A. So what I do is I take C, and I will do it, let's say it's 15. I do 15 times 15. That answer, and let's say this was 15 also, or 10. I would then take 10 times 10, which would be 100, whatever this is, I learned math, and then subtract this number from that number, and then square root that last number. Hit the square root key on that last number that I got. Once I minus this number from that number, I'll then get A, which then gives me the rise. Now, why do I care about the rise? The rise. Simple. When I'm doing siding, I need to get that gable end. How do I get that gable end? Pretty simple. If I know the rise, and I'm trying to get the siding on both sides, if I know what the rise is, okay, and I know what the span is, okay, I can take the span times the rise, and I know what the square footage is for both sides of that roof. I now know what this square footage is here, and that square footage on the other side for that siding. If I just wanted the one, I take the rise times the times the span divided by 2, and I now have, just for this one here, if I take it and I don't divide it by 2, I now have for both sides. Pretty simple. But remember, you can get the rise. How many times, where can I get the rise? I can get the rise sometimes from inside. If I can't get it from there, and if I can count these up, then I can then, and I know what this is, then I can then get this. Even if it's stucco. Okay, now, it's wood siding. You're going to need to know the thickness of how thick it is, how thick is the boards. I mean, not the width of it, excuse me, the width of the boards. So you need to know the width of the boards times the square footage. Width of the boards times square footage. Okay, and square footage is what? Length times width. Okay, now I get that. Now, also there's going to be a moisture barrier behind it. If I'm replacing one, remember wood can be replaced because wood's painted or stained. So I can replace just sections of that. If I'm replacing just sections of that, then I need to know the linear footage of that. If I'm replacing a whole section because a car ran right on through it, or a hurricane came through and damaged something, then I'm going to be looking at it in square footage. Otherwise, it's going to be linear footage. Or if I'm doing a whole section that might have gotten damaged, a tree came down and hit it, then I'm going to be squaring that off at least 2 times what I see as far as I square off the damaged area, add 2 times to that, and that's what I'm going to put in there. Okay, now let's go to our next page, which is 74. On 74, I have different types of drop sidings. Remember, all you're concerned about is the actual width of the siding. They do come in different shapes though. And the linear footage or square footage. Now, this is becoming more popular, and it's not always used in the same areas, and it also comes, and it's the same looking as for vinyl. Vinyl now is trying to duplicate the same look, and actually I think there's actually in the scope, an estimating book, you actually see an actual photograph of what they call board and batten, or batten and board, or board and board. And most of the time, most people think of this, they think of barn siding, something you would see on a barn. Some houses, you'll see it in a small little section of the house, like in the entrance level, it'll have a little small wall, and they'll put that in there to give it more of a homey kind of a look. And you'll also find it sometimes all the way around the house. Why? Because maybe you might actually be seeing a barn that's been returned over into a home. There's been a lot of those. So you're going to see this, just not as often. And just basically, again, it's going to be by linear foot or square footage, depending upon how much you have to replace. Okay, and that's board and batten. And again, it would be, remember, you have to refinish it. Every time you do this stuff, every time you do wooden, you always refinish it. You refinish the whole thing. That means prepare it. I put a coat on there for prep work, a paint, and then I put 2 coats. I always put 2 coats no matter what I'm working on. Let them negotiate it the other way. Next page is 176. These are the different types of corners that you might have. On like my house, I have corner boards. You might have metal corners. You'll see them, they're really cheap. You usually see them on aluminum. Aluminum, by the way, if aluminum gets damaged, we'll talk about that later. But once it gets damaged, you need to replace it. You can't repaint it. It's very hard to find a replacement for it because the outside finishes are going to be totally different. And you can't paint aluminum. They'll tell you you can, but you can't because now it becomes a maintenance issue. The homeowner didn't have a maintenance issue before. They put it on once, it was there forever. Now you would. You have lap joints, which you would see in cedar, and cedar type siding or shingle type siding, and then you have mitered, and that's where you actually 45 them. Now let's go to our next page, which would be 77. Now this has become very popular, and they come in all different types and materials. You have plywood T1, you have fiberboard T1, mainly fiberboard and plywood, and it's basically a 4x4 sheet that's made to look like board and batten, and it's pretty inexpensive. It has a rabbet joint on either end so that it overlaps, an overlapping joint, so that they keep on looking at the same thing all the way across. In general, you're basically going to be replacing either by panel on these ones. So if it's one panel, it's 48 square feet. So, and then refinishing the whole thing all over again. If it's painted, you may have a challenge because some of these have texture to them, and if they're peeling or whatever, they don't really scrape very well. So if they have this, hopefully they've stained it. Otherwise, there's going to be a challenge, and you may have to replace more. Installation of metal and vinyl siding. Now, vinyl, when it's cold, if it hits, will crack. In the summertime, it has a tendency to move and bow, and it once the color goes all the way through, but the problem is it can fade, and it can fade from the outside. So you can't match it. It's very difficult to match it. That's usually the biggest problem is matching. And they say, well, we don't know how to match, but we talked about that in the first DVD, and you know what I'm talking about. Not matching, indemnification. Aluminum, the problem with aluminum is that when you hit it, it dings and it doesn't come back. You can't just pop it out like a ding in a car. So aluminum dings, can't get out. Vinyl and aluminum both have a problem or a challenge with vandalism with eggs. When the protein dries and gets on there, forget about it, can't get off. We used to be able to get a lot of things when it came to mold spores. I haven't been able to get that because mold's no longer considered a peril. Okay, you might be able to still get it in some areas with an all-risk policy. It's what it is. It comes from mulch, shoots up to 20 feet. Little black gooey things that get on your siding and they don't come off. That's it for vinyl. Let's go to our next one, which is 79. And now we're dealing with stucco. Stucco comes in two different flavors. It comes in real stucco, and then it comes in another called Drive It. Drive It has been sued dramatically throughout the country. There's long been but their complaint was that it was for bad installation, and now it's supposedly coming back. Cracks. It has problems. It's a almost like a fiberglass type of material that it's made to look like stucco. Stucco is basically a cement mortar that is put over a mesh that ends up going across in a couple different layers in your with metal lath, and it basically is then put on as a siding and is waterproof. When it breaks off, it pops off. You can repair sections of it, and then sometimes if it's painted, you can then paint over it. If it hasn't been painted, sometimes you can argue to get a whole side of a stucco room or stucco thing, but you may not be able to get. And they'll actually try to go in and actually come close to the color, just like when they're doing mortar for a brick. They try to come up with a couple different samples and get as close to the color of the mortar. The same thing here with the stucco. Over wood studs, they do it one way. Over block, they do it a whole different way. Again, it's still lath, but they just adhere the lath differently. Again, done by a square yard. This one's done by a square yard. Okay, so you would take the square footage divided by what? 9. Okay, let's go to our next one. And we are now going to start on windows. Windows. How many people sell windows nowadays? Practically everybody. Replacement windows. What I want you to do is in here, I have in page 24 to 27, learn about glass. A lot of things about glass. There's at least a half an hour's worth of work on glass in there, giving you some understanding about glass. Now, you do width times height when you measure out a window, width times height, and you have different types of windows. Let's go through them. First slide is 80, that's called a double hung. Double hungs, the new style actually has a inside pull that makes it lift up and down. The older ones used to have rope that would go through or chain that would go inside the studs, drop down. They would have these lead weights, so it would actually lift up and lift down on lead weights. A lot of times those lead weights have been replaced, and they sometimes put replacement metal pieces in there. You have different kinds of panes of glass. We'll talk about that later. You have different amounts of panes, and I'll show you how to take care of that. It's another tool that you use. Let's go to our next page, 81. It's called a casement window. Older casement windows had problems. Newer casement windows are pretty good. Older casement windows used to leak. And they move in and out. Again, same measurements, width times height. Now, siding is sliding windows are you find them in an unusual type of housing. They're not always, and if you do find them like Levittown, they're like all the houses all had the same sliding windows. The newer ones are much nicer. The older ones are all aluminum. Again, we have windows. We have aluminum, vinyl, aluminum clad, wood. So you have all different types that you need to know what is it made out of, and exactly the width times the height on it, and what kind of style it is. That's a sliding window. A jealous window. You will not find them in the north unless you're talking about a sunroom. Down south, you'll find them all the time. The problem is with these, you can replace the single glass pieces, so you're not always getting the whole thing. And they can argue that, and guess what? They're right. Because you can match glass. It's not hard to match glass. Now, bow window, there's a lot of times where they will actually connect single picture, open, full, everything from jealous windows, from double hungs, you name it, they'll connect them together. They don't always have to be just single panes in each section. They can be different. Bay windows, usually the bay window also comes with a roof attached to it. And again, the measurements are going to be pretty simple. Width times height. And that would be for the whole thing, not for just the front, from the back. Okay? And awnings, you usually used to see them in the inside of apartments, the window above it, but they also have them on outside for basements. And they also have a different one for basements, which we're about to see, which is the hopper window. And usually the hopper window will open in, not out. So they let you know that. And but I have seen them put in backwards, believe it or not. Picture windows. We used to have one in our house. Birds have a problem with picture windows. They like to hit them. Picture windows are usually going to be a heavier, thicker when you can see that when you read about glass. The next one is 89. We're dealing with skylights. The older skylights, the flashing tend to always seem to be leaking. You look up on a skylight and you would automatically see leaks and different challenges around the skylight. Newer skylights don't have those challenges, as long as they're properly installed. Okay, now, an older window will have a single pane. Practically no insulation at all. And that's 90. 91, we see double and triple pane glass. Now, how do you know how many panes it is? When you're looking at the window, how do you know how many panes of glass they have in there? Well, it's very simple. You bring a lighter with you, and you flick a lighter in front of it, and for every little image of the flame you see, that tells you how many panes there are. So if I click it up and I see two flickers of the flame, 2 panes. Three panes. I'm way up north. I can even possibly see four panes of glass up in the north. And sometimes they put a film in the middle of these things to actually help stop the UVs from going in the wrong direction, and keeping the warmth in, and keeping the bad discoloring if you're all of your stuff in your house, the sun rays from coming in. Now, I also have, on top of that, if we were just talking about that, they put trapped gas in there. Sometimes it's argon. They use different types of gas. Sometimes that leaks. So sometimes you'll see windows with moisture in it. And that's usually part of the problem, is that the gas leaked out and other things came into it, and then it created a problem with that. Like I said, they also have a film that'll go also in there, a reflective film. And so that's that. Now let's go in and let's talk about the actual window itself. The top part of the window is called a rail. The sides are called stiles. The center sections are called muttons. And then you have panes of glass. Okay? Now, the muttons can be built in as real, or they can be pieces of plastic that go in, or wooden pieces that go in. If you're dealing with pillow windows, the muttons are actually inside the window. In fact, you can have pillow windows where actually you can actually blinds inside the window. I believe they can also do that with other different makes and manufacturers now. So you may have a few extra little goodies in each different window. You gotta look at them individually. And if you don't have it in your SimSol, then you need to go out and find out what it is. Then put the number in and find out the information on it. Okay, now let's go over the trim on a window. We have the apron down below. We have the sill, which we talked about before. We have the stool, which is usually on a double hung. Then we have a stop, which holds the window from coming out. We have the casing, which then wraps around the whole window, which basically blocks and takes between the drywall and where the window frame is, so that it makes it look nice. You have a jamb, which basically helps keep in the window where it's supposed to be. We have a parting bead, and we have a sash, and so we've already talked about. Let's go to, in each one of these things, if you have to replace it, it's what? Linear footage. Linear footage. And I'm probably going to be repainting it, the whole thing, and I'm going to get, going to go for getting the surface redone over, and also 2 coats of paint. Now, let's go to page 95. Now we're going to be talking about doors. Again, doors is width and height. In doors, you have many different types. You have metal and you have wood, and you have many different variations within the wood, and you have some variations also within the metal. Metal can be full solid metal, as far as a very thick, heavy-duty metal door, which will have like a foam core in it. That's more of a soundproofing type of a door. If you notice, they have rails, stiles, and panels. That's for a 4-panel door. 4 panels and 6 panels, pretty simple. 2 more panels on top, and they modify the other 2. You also have wood doors. You have full solid wood doors. You have hollow core doors. And that's going to change, because the doors can be pine, the doors can be oak, the doors can be mahogany, the doors can be many different types of wood. So you need to go around, and especially when you're doing cabinets, knowing more about different types of wood. Let's go to 96. In 96, we have 2 different types of doors. Most people think of French doors as 2 doors. No, French doors are where they have multiple. They're not called glass. They're called lights. When you put a glass in a door, it's called a light. Okay? So it's 3 by 5, 15. 15 lights, 2 doors, 30 lights in French doors, as we would know them. Okay? Dutch door. Mainly you're going to find it in a barn, something like that, down south maybe, because they open up. The problem is that they're not good for keeping the heat in. If you do see them, that's where you'll find them. Now, the flush door. The flush door a lot of times will be it's a hollow core door. They have almost looks like everything from cardboard in the inside with wood stiles on either side. and then it's basically sandwiched in there. Sometimes they'll actually have it where they're foam in the middle. Multiple different ways that they actually make the flush doors. Pretty cheap door. Louver doors, okay. Mainly you'll see them for indoors. They're or you might find them down in Florida, but you will not find them, and it would be deep Florida because I don't think you're even going to find them in the upper part of the northern part of Florida. Then you have a flush door with basically this door can either on 98 can either be where it's actually indented in, or it's actually coming out. It's like a panel. And actually, it looks like blocks on top of blocks, is what it looks like. And then you have a regular panel door that this is actually a metal one that actually has, see the buttons are inside that and inside the pane. And you have 2 panes of glass in this one. And actually, there would be 2 lights. And actually, supposed to look like 6, but that's the way that is. Let's go to the next page, which would be 99. 99, we have double acting doors. If you see this, it's in a very old home, very wealthy old home, Victorian type style house, because mainly this is a very dangerous door. And if you see this one doesn't have a window. They almost always have a little window because these are dangerous doors. Walking into a door and somebody's coming from the other side, bam, right in the face. Bypassing doors, closet doors. Everybody knows where we see these for closet doors. Now, pocket doors. These you'll see more and more. They're starting to become popular again. Mainly in the newer homes, you're starting to putting in pocket doors again. You'll always find them in a Victorian house a lot of times. That's pretty much where you're going to find those. You're going to see bifold doors. Where you're going to find them, usually in closets. Sometimes you actually find them not always made out of wood. Sometimes they're made out of other different materials. So, but most of the time they'll be made out of wood. Okay, and similar to what I was talking about here, accordion door, which you'll see on page 101. A lot of times these are made out of fabric. Sometimes they're made out of fine wood. When I mean fine wood, I mean thin plywood pieces that are all connected together like that, with sometimes fabric or vinyl. And then you have your metal entrance doors, which are foam filled in the center, like I was talking about. Now let's look at 102, and on page 102, which actually says 02, but it's actually 102. You actually have you can actually see the different parts of the door, the wood, the rail. Over here you can see the striker plate, stop, the jamb, see all the casing. A lot of things the same thing with the window. Then you'll see the head jamb, side jamb, stops. These are actually the major parts that surround the door that you can then put that in. You can all this by linear foot. You can do this by each. The door can be by itself. The jamb can be by itself. The door can be removed. A lot of times you'll remove and reset doors, remove and reset windows, not always replace them depending upon what you're doing. You need to know the application of what you're working on. The next one is 103, sectional doors. These are garage doors. This is what most people know. If you've ever seen the movie That Darn Cat, and you see where people actually got on the garage door, where actually it's called a tilt-up garage door, and they actually got lifted up into the garage door, that's what that door is right there. And then you also have the full opening garage doors. And garage doors can be extremely expensive. It's a whole new industry in high-level garage doors. So you need to, if they are that way, you need to do a little more research on that. Especially for the manufacturer and the pricing, because Simsol may not be adequate enough for that. Okay, let's talk about plaster. We're going to start going inside. Now, windows and doors, when you went to Simsol, by the way, you had residential, commercial, and you had windows and glass. Very easy, not hard to find, easy to find. Now we're going to start to get into things where it's going to make a difference as far as where you find things. Plaster. Plaster, I can find that on the ceiling items. I can find on the wall items. See, I'm going to be finding those in basically those two sections. And I also have the one section where it says ceilings and walls. If you have a combined thing, then you might want to go there. But otherwise, I usually go with the ceilings and then the walls. And then it expands and usually ends up being a little bit more doing it that way than it does by just going to ceilings and walls. Don't ask me why, it just does. Now, finish coat. I have a finish coat, I have a brown coat, and I have a scratch coat. When it comes to plaster. Now, plaster has metal lath and has wood lath. Most of the time, you're going to see wood lath with metal lath on the corners. That's the typical thing across the country. Wood lath with metal lath in the corners. You can find metal lath all over the place. You can even find what they call rock lath, which we'll be talking about next. But mainly what you're going to be finding is wood lath. And then when they press the plaster in, it oozes through. And when it hardens, it creates what is known as a key. Okay? It's called a key. And to replace all that and to have that all done over is extremely expensive. Plaster. Now, by the way, the brown coat is actually how they made the brown coat. Is like they actually took horsehair and they would chop it up and real fine and then mix that into that one layer that would go in, and that would be like the bonding agent for that layer. Now, plaster does not have to be painted. I actually had an adjuster actually sit there, an insurance adjuster who was teaching other insurance adjusters, tell me that you can find plaster and it's in mint condition in the Pharaoh's tombs. It's thousands of years old. But when you see plaster, make sure you depreciate it by 50%. Well, how can it be thousands of years old and pristine and then you want to depreciate it by 50%? Be careful when it talks about depreciating plaster. Plaster has a couple different challenges. There's one where it's called loose on lath. What happens is the keys have broken behind it, and it's still there, it's still attached, but you tap on it and it sounds hollow. That's damage. That has to be replaced. Okay. Another one is where it's actually come off also off the wall. Okay. And then there's another one when a lot of water gets on it, and it's a very technical term. Believe it or not, it's called mushy. If the plaster feels mushy, then it needs to be replaced. If it's a little water on it, it can usually dry. You probably just need to seal it and paint it again if we had a finish on it. Now, if I'm going to replace plaster, you basically square it off and then you add a little bit more to it, about another foot around it. Okay. Square it off and then add another foot around it because it has to be repaired. If you have enough repairs, try to get the whole wall. In fact, you might even just try to get the whole wall and then work your way back. Remember, aim for the eagle, bag the pheasant, so you don't eat crow. Well, this is the case that it's not bad to do that. Let's go to 105. We have various types of metal lath. Metal lath is metal lath and Simsol though, so don't worry about it. Now, and then we were talking about rock lath. It's a special board that they buy. If that's the case, it's square footage. Same square footage as far as the regular lath. It has to be replaced. If you have damaged lath, if it's damaged lath, you have to go a much bigger area, 2 times to make sure that it'll fix. If you have wooden lath that's been damaged. Okay. Only because it keeps going for multiple studs. A lot of times there's no insulation behind these walls, by the way, especially down south. No insulation. A lot of homes never had insulation. It wasn't until the 50s they started really putting insulation a lot in the homes. Before that, a lot of homes didn't have it. Didn't exist unless you were special and you wanted to put it in there. And then it was really cheap and junky looking stuff. Okay, we have on 107, you can see, and actually if you look through the estimating book, you see more information about repairing and plaster. Okay, now let's go into 108. And in 108, we're talking about drywall insulation. You have two different types of drywall insulation, um, vertical and horizontally. 9 times out of 10, it's going to be vertical, not horizontal. And it's usually done by drywall screws. When drywall goes, it's going to the paper. When the paper gets damaged, or you see crystallization on the outside, you got to replace it. Crystallization on the outside, or you see, or it's had enough water on it that it's soft, starts to change its hard feel to it, and it's got to be replaced. And again, same thing as I would replace plaster. It's the same way that I replace drywall. Now drywall, remember, we're going to be doing what? Replacing the drywall. We're going to re-go over all the surface, we're going to resurface everything, all those little holes, those little nail holes, everything else. I'm going to have them all filled in. That's also in the system. And that would be in walls, the wall items. Ceilings, the odds are I don't have any holes in, but I would even try to put even resurfacing on the ceiling. And then prepping is called prep work. And then from there, then I would put a seal coat and 2 coats of paint. Okay. You need to put all the additives in there. That's how you bring the numbers up really nice for the client and for yourself at the same time. And guess what? That's the proper way to do it. That's the proper way to do it, so that's the way it should be done. Don't let them argue otherwise. Because you know what? They're going to say, well, it's only what the client had before. How would you know what the client had before? What do you do? Take a blade and try to scrape off the balance of paint and everything else and figure out what they had on there before? I don't think so. And that gets the cost of having some kind of heavy-duty technician to come in to try to find that out. You end up paying for the thing anyway. So don't let them argue with that. Not all drywall is painted, because you can go to a garage and all you see is taped and floated. And taped and floated, if you see on 109, it shows you it. And tape and floating takes a little while. Now that's actually factored in to the unit pricing in drywall when you're repairing it. The taping and floating is in there, okay? So you don't have to worry about that. Unit pricing is really helpful dramatically from having to worry about every little stupid thing. On the outside, we have in the corners we have a wire mesh that goes up. Sometimes we'll actually put in a fiberglass mesh, and they use corner beads for the corners. And that's how you built that up. That's all by linear foot. You want to make sure you add that, because not every time is it added. It's not built into the unit price, the corner beads. And remember, if you have any molding, we're going to be talking about molding later on, but we're also dealing with molding. If I'm painting one, I'm going to paint the other. I'm going to paint the molding, because I have to make sure, otherwise I got to make sure that I'm put in for the extra time. If they're not going to pay for the molding, for painting it, then you make sure that you put all the extra time in there for taping off all that molding. And they'll end up giving it to you anyway, because the taping off can be also expensive for taking all that time, including all the windows and everything else, okay? And by the way, we do not take out for doors or windows. And you know what? You argue with that with them. When you're talking to them, you say, look, you're not taking out for doors and windows, because contractors, when they bid this price, do not take out for doors and windows. And it has to be according to real life contracting rules that are happening out in the real life. It's not what they want to make them to be. Okay, you don't take out for doors and windows. Come on, let's get real. Because you know what? I will argue. I'll argue that one in small claims court with the homeowner every single time. Win that one hands down. That's a cheap, simple thing, and you know what? I'll even go for bad faith every time. I'll beat you up. It's going to cost you more for a lawyer, and you're going to lose every time. Okay, drywall. Drywall, metal studs, wooden studs. Now remember, when you're doing a room, you may have drywall. What's on the back of the drywall? A lot of houses today have insulation in the inside walls. These walls right here have insulation in them. This used to be a doctor's office. So the doctor's office wanted to have it so that it's quiet in this room, was quiet in that room, was quiet in the next room. So therefore that it was quiet all the way through, they put insulation in. Sometimes it's for quiet, sometimes it's for other different reasons. Mainly, you don't know until sometimes you can just be on the other wall and just talk, and have somebody else go over there talk, you'll know quickly if there's insulation in that wall. But if it's there and if it's because of water damage, it's going to have to be replaced. On the outside walls, guaranteed, if I've got water damage, I'm going to be putting in for insulation. Now, let's go to 112. We're talking about ceiling tiles. Okay, now we're going to ceiling. Before we even do that, before I go there, I just want to talk about one more thing. On walls, we have paneling. You have every kind. You have multiple different types of grades of paneling. You have paneling that's like this. That's full solid boards, and then it actually goes up. And you have chair rails, which are then put on top of that. Then you have full regular panels, like the cheap paneling that you've always talked about. You see in different houses. Then you have even a higher grade of that. Almost looks like a T1 type of a board. So paneling is also another thing. One of the things we need to do is you need to take the time to go through materials and go through a Home Depot, a Lowe's. Take the time to look at the different grades of material. It'll take you about a weekend to do this. A weekend to go through and just walk through, look at the different grades of the materials. Don't worry about the pricing, just look at the recognition. Okay? The pricing will kind of tell itself on its own, but look for the recognition of the different kinds of grades. Cabinets, all material. Now, drywall's drywall. Drywall, the only thing that you're going to be different about drywall is that the thicknesses. You have 3/8, you have 1/2 inch, so you have to look at what's the thicknesses. Usually the average drywall is 1/2 inch, but if you have very thin walls, you may have a lot of times what they'll do is to put instead of putting 2x4s in, they'll put in 2x3s and 3/8 drywall to help to make up the difference for space. So and those walls are usually you can hear a penny drop on a carpet floor. So you have to remember they're going to be different for every different situation. They've actually got walls that are almost literally just the thickness of a board in Hawaii. I was looking at, I think it was on this old house, very thin walls, depending upon the application and what kind of environment you're in. Okay, let's go to 112. We're going to go to ceiling tiles. Now, the first type of ceiling tile you see is the kind that they call the staple ones. You take that lady, she's stapling. And the problem is that when they go, you can't replace them. You can't fix that. Because you literally have to take everything else down. When you do that, you destroy the whole thing. So when one goes, they all go. And remember, pre-existing conditions. If I have a ceiling tile, one stained, if I haven't replaced it, then I have to replace them all. Okay, replace them all. Now, we'll be talking about, and actually 113, suspended ceilings. This is something that you must consistently, and then you want to see this? You want to see this every single day? Go into a restaurant. Look up in the ceiling. If you don't see mismatched tiles, I'll be surprised. Unless it's brand new or it's it could even be a chain restaurant. And they'll have mismatched tiles. Now, what they'll try to do is they'll paint over them. By the way, painting over a suspended ceiling tile is actually considered a fire hazard. Most people don't know that. It's considered a fire hazard unless you're using the right type of paint. And I guarantee you, most of them aren't using the right type of paint. So if they're going to look at it, the insurance judge is going to look at it. He's going to say if it's been mismatched before, then I don't have to replace all of them. That's the argument that you're going to find. So you need to communicate with your homeowner. If you're doing a commercial account later on, if you're doing a small one, talk to them. That has to be taken care of. Now, ceiling tiles come in. You have the actual grid that they lay out. That metal grid can be aluminum. It also can be steel. If it's steel grid, I'm going to replace that grid also. The reason is because if it was water damage, it's going to show rust later on. Maybe not now, but in several months, and within 6 months, it's going to start showing me rust that it didn't before. And it wouldn't have done it if it hadn't had the water. So I'm automatically going to put in for that grid. Now, the other thing that you want to be concerned about is that tiles come in different sizes and different grades. You have very cheap tiles, which are low-level tiles, then you have your mid-level tiles, then you have your high-level tiles. High-level tiles are usually very sculptured tiles. They have different shapes on them. And then you have your mid-level tiles, which are basically an imprint, just basically like the holes in, like this shows you here. Then you have your really cheap ones, which are like, the flimsy and everything else. They're garbage. So unless they're garbage, go for mid-level, and if they have any sculpture, you want to go for the high grade. If they're really thicker, but they're no sculpture, then also go for the higher grade also. Then you have two different sizes. You have 2x2s, 2 feet by 2 feet, and you have 4 feet by 4 feet by 2 feet. So you have the two sizes, and also you'll have which are 4 feet by 2 feet, but they have this little groove that's cut through the center of it to make it look like it's 2 by 2. Okay, so look at it real carefully. It could be a 2 by 4, 2 feet by 4 feet, and that's also done by square feet. All of this is done by square feet. Okay, let's talk about 114 stairs. Now, I was talking about this before, and by the way, if I'm going to put carpet on a stairwell, carpet is going to be 2 times this is the formula for putting carpet on a stairwell. Because we're going to be talking about carpet later on, but I wanted to give you this right now since we're talking about stairwells. It's 2 times the width times 1.333. 2 times the width times that times 1.333. Got it? 2 times the width times 1.33. If it's a 3 foot wide, which is a standard 8 cubic yards. Now, remember, 1.333 divided by what? 9, because we're looking for what? Square yards. Even though they do sell carpet nowadays in square footage. And Simsol handles carpet in square footage or square yards. So, most of the places you're going to be buying it for square yards, and most of your adjusters are going to be putting it in as square yards. So you want to show apples for apples, go for square yards. Okay. If for some reason the other adjuster does it the other way around, it takes you a second to find out if he's how close he is by looking at the square footage just by multiplying it times 9 and then putting in the square foot. Again, we see rise and run. Pretty much all stairs are going to be the same because most ceiling heights are always by 8 foot. Now, on here we have a couple different things. We have a closed stringer, which I was telling you about before. We have the tread, we have the riser, we have an open stringer, and we have the null post, okay, and we have the railing, head rail as we talked about. We also have the stiles that go in between. By the way, they have to be within a certain width because kids have this tendency to want to stick their heads through, and then these boys seem to do that. Their ears get stuck in these, the old cartoons and things like that. Dennis the Menace, Eva the Beaver. I mean, if you haven't seen that before. So they actually, since those days, have actually made it so that there has to be so much space between us so the kids can't do that to them anymore because they can actually hurt themselves. Now, let's go to 115. Molding. Molding is so great. If I have cove molding, if you see in there, and I've had quarter round molding. Quarter round molding is what you do when you see on the floor. Or sometimes you'll see it on a wall. Okay? Quarter round on the wall, quarter round on the floor. Okay? Cove molding, small cove molding on the floor or on the wall. I'm replacing that. When I'm replacing that, I'm replacing it. Now, if it's crown molding, they might want you to remove and reset it, and that can be done. You can, depending upon what you want to do with it, and how you feel when you're working with that particular guy, feel them out. Chair rails, I might remove and reset a chair rail because I've got wallpaper. Why? Because maybe the chair rail was put on after the wallpaper was put on. So I might have to remove the chair rail to get the rest of the wallpaper behind the chair rail. Then you have baseboards, and they're all totally different kinds, and as you see different kinds here, you can then you may replace them. I wanted to recap one more thing about ceilings that we didn't get a chance to go over, and that is that you could have metal ceilings, and again that would be a square footage, and you can also have also on the plaster you may have plaster moldings. That'll also be viewed by linear footage, and you may have what is known as a beadboard or wooden board, some kind of a wooden ceiling. They're also going to be by square footage. Okay, you're not going to be replacing one board here or there, usually in a ceiling, because if it's a ceiling, it's going to be tongue and groove, and you're going to basically have to remove everything to fix one board and put it all the way back in again. So the odds are, if you're actually replacing something, you're probably going to be replacing the whole thing.